blockchain. Things are about to change. Open up the gates. Systems get replaced. Bitcoin, decentralize the trust. Security, transparency. The network's run by us. Bitcoin.
Hello and welcome to the Bitcoin.com podcast. This is your host, Zach Doty. We have a special guest, Adam Draper, for you today. Adam's a venture capitalist with Boost.vc, son of Tim Draper. Adam, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Zach. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So I've seen some of your videos. We've talked in the past, and I've seen a lot of the companies that you've invested in. So maybe quick, we can start off with a recap of the venture capital space in 2015 for Bitcoin startups and what you think 2016 might hold.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the important things to think about is, so Boost.vc, we've been the Bitcoin accelerator or blockchain accelerator. We're trying to change the vernacular over to blockchain completely, as Bitcoin is an opportunity built on the blockchain. But one of the things that I think would be good is just talking about all the trends that have happened over the last sort of 4 years, where, you know, initially what was exciting was we moved from ASICs, the vernacular was really around the chips, and it was about Bitcoin, and then it was about altcoins and digital currencies, cryptocurrencies. And it went from crypto to altcoin to Bitcoin, and then once we got to Bitcoin, we sort of shifted off of that onto the blockchain and trying to understand what those opportunities are. And that's really where we are right now, where a lot of investor interest is falling around the blockchain. Because of whether it be, they're interested in settlement, whether they're interested in smart contracts. There are a lot of large opportunities that sort of fall under the blockchain. So last year was really interesting year for Bitcoin specifically. And the reason is interest of sort of investing in Bitcoin startups fell a lot, and as far as the sentiment around it, but it rose in reference to the blockchain, where financial institutions were condemning Bitcoin for whatever reason. They have been praising the technology underlying Bitcoin, the blockchain. And it's a really exciting thing. I actually think this year is going to be the year of the blockchain, which will also drive the value of Bitcoin up. Because I think every financial institution had a meeting in January at the beginning of the year saying, you know, this is all the banks, all the big institutions, all the brokers, all are talking about, okay, what do we do about the blockchain? Because everyone has assessed that there is a big opportunity there, and they just haven't figured out exactly what it is yet. So they're all running experiments. So this year there will be a lot of action that end up coming to fruition that ends up happening towards the end of the year.
Great. So Bitcoin versus the blockchain. How does the network effect play into that? And is this all hype? I know there's a big transition between, you know, the interest in Bitcoin to the blockchain, but how much of that is internet versus intranet, and how much of that is going to go away and come back to Bitcoin in 2 years when it shows itself as the most secure, the strongest network effect, and the strongest blockchain from a security standpoint?
I mean, I don't think it's Bitcoin versus the blockchain, and I think both words end up fading to the background. I don't even say the internet anymore. I just say, hey, I'm going to use Facebook, and I'm going to send you a message. I'm going to email you. I think the adoption of blockchain and Bitcoin are, first off, I feel that they're very synonymous. I do feel that it is, when I refer to the blockchain, I believe I'm referring to Bitcoin's blockchain. Almost everyone always is. And if you refer to payments on the blockchain, 95% of the time people are talking about Bitcoin specifically. They just don't want to say Bitcoin. For some reason, there's a little bit of a taboo that has happened over the last year around the word Bitcoin in the financial institution world. So I don't think it's Bitcoin versus blockchain vernacular. I think it's an evolution of the technology and where it becomes useful. And as of right now, the financial institutions are identifying real problems inside of their processes that can be resolved with this technology, which is really exciting. And that leads to huge adoption by the consumers, because these big financial institutions will push blockchain usage downwards towards all the people who use their services. And that will create huge amounts of adoption, and I believe that Bitcoin will be a part of that. So, I just don't think it's Bitcoin versus blockchain. I think it's sort of, we're talking about a similar problem set.
Right, so we have the main chain, we have alt chains, and then we're going to have this new concept, hopefully in 2016, of side chains emerging and bringing additional functionality to the main chain and linking that to that security with. So,
I mean, a lot of people are working on all the problems that Bitcoin has and coming up with different solutions. I hope side chains work. I also hope Ethereum works. I also hope, because I think that everyone is pushing towards the same end goal of having this technology adopted by everyone. And it is a back-end change out of the entire financial infrastructure, which ends up being a really big deal.
Absolutely. So what companies are you investing in the blockchain space? And which of those companies would you want to highlight as being your favorites or most interesting at this point to you?
So I don't like playing favorites, but I'll highlight a few who have sort of started really solving problems and made it to the market pretty handily. One I believe you've already done a podcast with is BlockCypher, which is really doing dev tools for blockchain-based businesses, and they just make it easy to spin up a blockchain. They're going to be building out and releasing a lot new feature sets this year. As I believe that one of the big evolutions that needs to happen in the next year for Bitcoin and blockchain to succeed is financial institution adoption. I think that BlockCypher's in a really good spot where they are enabling a lot of the institutions to be able to build with blockchain, and so that's a really exciting. It's an exciting company. It's an exciting time. Basically, there's this huge problem with, let's say you're Walmart, you're a big company, and you send money to a subsidiary in Mexico. Your money is subject to 5 days of currency, Forex, like the fluctuation of currency. And that's a huge problem. It turns out it's like a billions and billions dollar problem per big company that has a lot of subsidiaries. And it's a really interesting way to use blockchain with payments. And then Hedgie is allowing hedging contracts and putting them on the blockchain. They were technically the first smart contract that got pushed onto the blockchain. It's a really exciting time in that space. A lot of settlement in smart contracts. I mean, a lot of the old systems are going to be evolving towards what these three companies are pushing in the next 12 months.
Great. So talk a little bit about Hedgie and smart contracts.
And by the way, that's three of, we've backed 56 in the Bitcoin space, Bitcoin blockchain space. Here, I'm going to use the word blockchain. I don't like having to repeat Bitcoin and blockchain, but I mean the overarching industry of secure, transparent ledgers.
Now, you've invested in a number of Bitcoin startups outside the U.S. The one you just mentioned, Fluent, they kind of bridge those international borders, but then you've also invested in BitPagos and the Indian exchange, Unicoin.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about the Bitcoin blockchain development outside of the U.S. in emerging markets, maybe Asia, Latin America, Europe. How do you see that?
I'd say the U.S., because our payment systems are actually pretty fluid and good, and like as far as an end consumer, from my perspective, like paying for something with a Visa card is the same process, if not like faster in some ways than like using Bitcoin at a merchant store. That is not true for the rest of the world. Actually, Bitcoin itself is super necessary to a lot of emerging markets or growing markets, such as Argentina, Venezuela, India, places that experience hyperinflation where their payment systems might not be up to the current like United States system. This can be a leapfrogging technology to bring everyone up to speed. That's really what BitPagos and Unicoin are out there trying to solve, is really building a global payment system, which is really exciting.
Now, CoinPrism is one of your investments, and so I have a question that kind of relates to what they're doing with Colored Coins, Open Assets Protocol, on other blockchain-traded securities. Now, I know with all your investments, you have to do the legal side of things, you have to do the PPMs and the term sheets and the subscription agreements, but do you guys also track the shares for the companies you invest in using something like Colored Coins or Open Assets Protocol?
Oh, I would love to. That's a good idea. We've talked about doing things like that, and it's it would be sort of like a parallel thing right now. So we wouldn't be doing, because you would have to get all the people who would be, investing in the future to commit to it, to make it real, essentially. It's a good idea, though. We should establish a protocol to do all investments that way. I think it'd be a really interesting way to at least track it. Thanks for suggesting that. We talked about it a little while ago, but we hadn't brought it up for 6 months. And it's so easy to establish sort of new, coin-based equity with CoinPrism. It makes no sense not to do that.
For sure. Absolutely. Now, what do you think about the blockchain's potential to almost disrupt the traditional VC approach and bring equity crowdfunding to the masses?
Yeah, so I think I actually understand that space a lot better than I actually launched the first crowdfunding for equity platform. It was called Boost Funder before I founded Boost. So I actually understand the crowdfunding for equity system, and then also Bitcoin and blockchain. I think we're at this sort of crossroads where the crowdfunding with the coin-based system, it's going to work because it's efficient. You can keep track of it. The ledger clears it automatically. Like, there are a lot of things that are better about that system. The problem is right now that you need a regulatory body to adopt it. Otherwise, it's just not going to get mass approval. Like, the reason that, a lot of Bitcoin people are still anti the system. But for mass adoption, it's going to be really, really important for the system to have that regulatory approval. You'll never go completely around the government. There's going to be a really interesting experiment that probably happens in the next year that brings that to life. So I think it's going to be awesome. I love disruption in every industry. If my own industry gets disrupted, I just hope I'm on the side of it that's winning.
Cool. So, but yeah, and I agree with you. The regulatory part, has to be an element just because of how that's all set up.
And I don't love saying that, for the record. It's more.
It's the reality of doing business.
The regulation. But I also see the regulation as a barrier to entry. Like, if you get through that regulatory approval, that's something that a lot of startups can't get through. So regulation is an opportunity for a lot of people. So.
Right. It's an opportunity for those who can afford lawyers, and it's kind of a moat around the competition. So on the equity crowdfunding note, so how do you think Jobs 3 plays into that? Do you think that that's going to open a lot of doors for equity crowdfunding?
Are you talking about the Jobs Act Part 3? Is that is that what they're calling it? Jobs 3?
Yeah, the new Jobs 3 crowdfunding provision that allows for basically general solicitation for selling securities.
Basically, if you file with the SEC for crowdfunding, it's really interesting. We're actually seeing this in the last 2 or 3 weeks. This never happened before, but if you've already filed with the SEC, funds like Boost.vc is other funds have actually announced that they're fundraising, not that they closed a fund, that they are actually in the process of fundraising, which never happened before the Jobs Act, which is really, it's an exciting thing. It allows more people to hear about it. It's less of a private thing, and it helps the fund. It's a lot of awareness. It's a lot of, you drum up a lot of excitement for it. Yeah, I mean, that's the solicitation thing is just such an obvious rule to make it a little better. It was so restrictive before. I remember when I was at Expert Financial, which was my first company that I started, that was in the secondary market space. We were so adamant that the crowdfunding was going to be such a great big change in the equity space. I still think that there needs to be there's an evolution that's happening. It takes time. Like right now, I still think the venture capital still holds a lot of the power and value. But right now, the equity crowdfunding is sort of it's like an additional reach. So if one of our companies fundraises at 90% of their money, listing on the Angel List or any of those other crowdfunder, Funders Club, any of those crowdfunding platforms, you get this extra reach and a little extra money, but it's really just add-on right now, just as far as the process that works to fundraise. Starting the process with Funders Club, Angel List, crowdfunder, like those, it doesn't quite function as well yet.
So I was talking to Wang, the CEO of CoinNet, and I've been friends with him since I think before he was accepted into Boost. And I know he's over in Singapore, and it sounds like a lot of their investments above and beyond what you guys have done is coming from China and Singapore. So how much VC activity do you see outside of the U.S.? How many? That was actually surprising to me because, I've always considered 95% of it to come from Silicon Valley. But, how much VC investments do you see right now from China and Singapore and other jurisdictions?
You're talking about venture capital in general?
Well, mostly Bitcoin blockchain specific.
So I was out in China in December. People are very excited about blockchain. They are trying to pursue a lot of blockchain related investments. They're still, watching a little bit what is happening in the United States before they dive in China, or like any of the entrepreneurs really jump in China. I mean, it's a huge amount. I like all of a sudden starting a company is not it's not a regional activity. One of the great things about crowdfunding, one of the great things about that reach I was talking about is that your reach can go beyond just the U.S. borders suddenly. You could be raising funding, in any country in the world, because the internet reaches everyone. So we're seeing a lot. Actually, it would be a really interesting statistic to see how much of the funding was coming from outside the U.S. versus inside the U.S. I still think U.S. is 4x any money that's coming from outside the U.S. for Bitcoin or blockchain related investments. However, I do believe that a significant portion is starting to transcend those borders, especially institutions. There are a lot of corporate VCs who have been starting in Japan, China, Singapore, where all of these banking institutions are trying to figure out what the next step is for their business, and everyone is pointing at blockchain. All signs point to Bitcoin and the blockchain.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that there's definitely jurisdictional benefits to, doing venture capital raises outside of the U.S. as well. It's easy to do, for example, a Reg S offering and stuff. What are your thoughts on distributed autonomous corporations, and do you think that those might be the next level of equity crowdfunding? I noticed that one of your portfolio companies is, BitMesh, and so they're developing this network for Wi-Fi sharing. That has the potential to be a distributed autonomous corporation. Do you see that developing, and do you see some of those taking off this year?
I mean, I'm willing to be proven wrong, but I think decentralized autonomous means it has no leader. And thus far, I haven't seen anything that opposes. You need to drive things so hard if it's your idea that you want someone who's driving it forward. We're even with Bitcoin in the pure democracy process of the mining system, it's very difficult to get things voted in. If there's no driving force behind it, my opinion is that decentralized autonomous corporation won't work in reference to someone who's leading and centralizing that corporation as a company. But I am willing to, be proven wrong. I also, and maybe I don't understand how that operates well enough, like the open source system operates, but I still see those elements, like to drive ideas forward, you really need to be holding and driving it with like the passion that you have. What are your thoughts? I'd love to discuss this because it comes up a lot and I'm interested in sort of getting to the bottom of it, but my opinion has not been swayed in all of the conversations I've had.
Well, I think BitMesh is an interesting opportunity because it would allow an engineer to develop the software. So you can have that leadership in the direction that the software develops, but then the software could be deployed in such a way that, there's many different beneficiaries, including investors. If the firmware of these routers, for example, were to actually pay payments to an address that the blockchain used to distribute as dividends, you just have an interesting dynamic there. And I think Slockit is actually potentially the first company that I've seen to really put this out in the real world. Slockit has these locks that, can be unlocked through the blockchain using, Bitcoin authentication. And with their technology, the locks send a payment back to the shareholder. So if you invest in Slockit, they're based on Ethereum, but if you invest in their company, you own this digital asset, which represents shares of Slockit, and you get a small payment every time somebody unlocks a Slockit lock. So I guess the idea behind a decentralized autonomous corporation.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, so I guess the idea is, you can still have that leadership. They're still in charge of building the locks. They deploy them. They put them on the shelves.
Then it's not decentralized, right?
Maybe
So
we could call
I
it an
think
autonomous
it's
corporation.
maybe it's my vernacular problems, but like decentralized to me means there is no central authority to make any decisions.
Yeah, so maybe this is just an autonomous corporation, right?
Yeah, which I think is very interesting, and that sounds really cool. I had not heard of Slockit, and I'm sort of excited about it.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things that this changes is the investors don't have to count on the company surviving to know that they're going to get some kind of return. If the product survives and is still out there being used every day, right, they're still going to be getting payments into their Bitcoin wallet or their Ethereum wallet or whatever every day, regardless of whether the company's still in business or not. So that's a very interesting change to the traditional business model.
I think that's really interesting. I'm excited to learn more. I'm going to reach out to Slockit right now.
Cool. So what are the...
Do you know any other projects that are working in that way, in that capacity?
I have a number of ideas for distributed autonomous corporations. I think that there's a lot of potential in the Wi-Fi sharing. I actually have a client right now that I'm working on building something like that with. So, something similar to BitMesh. I was talking to Andreas about his Wi-Fi portal, and there's definitely a lot of cool things that could come out of data sharing. And, if you build firmware and you kind of lock the firmware down, so it's not open source, but you release it to telcos and they can deploy this to 100 million devices, then you have 100 million devices distributing Wi-Fi using, firmware that pays them, pays the shareholders, pays the developers. So yeah, I think that, the machine-to-machine economy is where this can work, anywhere that the firmware is in charge of the payments.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think it's pretty interesting. Thank you for inviting me on the podcast. And
yeah, I'm excited to keep in touch with you as well, though. I'm up here in Idaho, and
yeah, if you run any interesting companies, send them our way. Or if you're starting something, I'm happy to look.
Yep, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Adam. We'll talk to you soon.
Blockchain. Things are about to change. Open up the gates. Systems get replaced. Bitcoin. Decentralize the trust. Security, transparency. The networks run by us. Blockchain.